Good morning, Norfolk and Nottinghamshire classes. Welcome to your destination reader lesson for today, the BFG by Roald Dahl. This is the 19th lesson of 20 lessons. Okay, so just like in our other lessons, keywords, important words for you are going to be in red. Any questions for you to answer will be in blue, and any writing time will be in green. I want you to check you've got everything ready for your lesson today. You need to have a copy of the story, your strategy prompt sheet, a pencil or a pen, and a piece of paper or your home learning book. Go and get those things together, then press play and continue the lesson. Press pause now. The BFG by Roald Dahl. Okay, so we're going to continue with strategy number 4. Evaluating. My turn evaluating, your turn. My turn evaluating, your turn. Okay, what do you think it means when we are evaluating? What does it mean to evaluate a text? I want you to have a little think and say your answer out loud and then write your answer down on your home learning book or on your piece of paper. Do that now. Press pause. Okay, super, you're back. So, evaluating means to comment on the quality of a text and say why. It's to say whether something's good or something needs to be improved and why you think so. Okay, so why do good readers evaluate a text? I want you to have a little think, then say your answer out loud, then make a note of it on your home learning book or on your piece of paper. Why do good readers evaluate a text? Press pause now. Okay, so let's have a look and see. Well, good readers evaluate text while they read because it helps them to get a deeper connection and a better understanding of the text and the author's choices. And also, if we're really good at evaluating, we can sometimes take some of the good ideas and use them in our own writing. We were very good at that when we read Maz Evans, Who Let the Gods Out. Really good at evaluating. We liked the humour, and so then we used her humour in our writing. Okay, so today's vocabulary. My turn, pun, your turn. My turn, pun, your turn. So a pun, it's a joke. It plays on the different meanings of words. You know, we have lots of words in English, and some of our words sound the same, but they've got different meanings, and that's what a pun does. It plays on that difference. Pun. My turn, stand to attention. Your turn. My turn, stand to attention. Your turn. You might have even noticed how I said stand to attention in a very serious voice. When we stand to attention, we stand up straight with our feet together and our arms at our sides. It's a very military phrase, stand to attention. My turn, grudgingly, your turn. My turn, grudgingly, your turn. So if you do something grudgingly, you do it, but you're very reluctant, you're very unwilling, you don't want to do it grudgingly. My turn, the foggiest idea. Your turn. My turn, the foggiest idea. Your turn. So the foggiest idea is to say that somebody doesn't really have an idea. They don't really understand something. They don't have the foggiest idea. They don't know something. The foggiest idea. Okay, so we've got some 1 mark and some 2 mark answers coming up. So let's just have a look and see how we answer them. 1 mark questions need a short, snappy answer. Your turn. My turn. 1 mark questions need a short, snappy answer. Your turn. Okay, and mostly with evaluating, we're going to have 2 mark questions. So, my turn. 2 mark questions need a PE answer. Your turn. My turn. 2 mark questions need a PE answer. Your turn. Great. Okay, and that is the point. What is the main idea and the evidence, backing it up with examples. Okay, so we're going to continue reading. We're near the end of our book. We're on page 168, and we're up to the plan. So at the moment, the BFG has just finished having breakfast with the Queen and Sophie, and the Queen has now found out that actually these horrible giants have been eating children and people all over the world. And so now we have the plan, and I wonder what that plan is going to be. I think the plan will be what they plan to do and how to get rid of these giants. Okay, so you should be on page 168, and we're going to be evaluating what the author has written. Okay, keep that in your head. I'm going to read. I want you to follow along. The head of the army and the head of the Air Force stood at attention beside the Queen's breakfast table. Sophie was still in her seat, and the BFG was still high up on his crazy perch. It took the Queen only 5 minutes to explain the situation to the military men. I knew there was something like this going on, Your Majesty, the head of the army said. For the last 10 years, we've been getting reports from nearly every country in the world about people disappearing mysteriously in the night. We had one only the other day from Panama. For the Atty taste, cried the BFG. And one from Wellington in New Zealand, said the head of the army. For the booty flavour, cried the BFG. And we're going to stop there. Okay, the giant comments. For the Atty taste and for the booty flavour. Why are these humorous? Why are these funny? I want you to listen whilst I think aloud. Okay, so the giant's comments are humorous. They're funny because they're a pun. They're a play on words. And I think this because hatty flavour, well, Panama, it's the name of a type of hat. And so he says that, and it's also the name of a place. And so he says that the Panama people, they have a hatty flavour to them. And Wellington has a booty flavour because we've got Wellington boots. So Wellington is the name of a city. It's the capital city in New Zealand. And it's also the name of a boot, Wellington boots. So they've got a booty flavour. So it's a pun. It's a play on words. And that's why those comments are so funny. Okay, I want you to have a turn answering that evaluating question. I want you to say the giant's comments for the hatty taste, for the booty flavour. Why are these humorous? Say your answer out loud, then write it down on your piece of paper or your home learning book, and then press play and continue the lesson. Okay, do that now. Press pause. Okay, great. You're back. Well done. So good evaluating, everybody. We're going to continue reading the story. Get your books ready. What is he talking about? Said the head of the Air Force. Work it out yourself, the Queen said. What time is it? 10 a.m. In 8 hours, those 9 bloodthirsty brutes will be galloping off to gobble up another couple of dozen unfortunate wretches. They have to be stopped. We must act fast. We'll bomb the blighters, shouted the head of the Air Force. We'll mow them down with machine guns, cried the head of the army. I do not approve of murder, the Queen said. But they are murderers themselves, cried the head of the army. That is no reason why we should follow their example, the Queen said. 2 wrongs do not make a right. And 2 rights don't make a left, cried the BFG. We must bring them back alive, the Queen said. How? The 2 military men said together. They are all 50 feet high. They'll knock us down like 9-pins. Wait, cried the BFG. Hold your horseflies. Get your skirts on. I think I has the answer to the maidens here. Let him speak, the Queen said. Every afternoon, the BFG said, all these giants is in the land of Noddy. I can't understand a word this fella says, the head of the army snapped. Why doesn't he speak clearly? He means the land of Nod, Sophie said. It's pretty obvious. Exactly, cried the BFG. Every afternoon all these nine giants is lying on the ground, snoozling away in a very deep sleep. They is always resting like that before they is galloping off to guzzle another helping of human beans. Go on, they said. So what? So what your soldiers has to do is creep up to the giants while they is still in the land of Noddy and tie their arms and legs in mighty ropes and wunkling chains. Brilliant, the Queen said. That is all very well, said the head of the army, but how do we get the brutes back here? We can't load 50-foot giants onto trucks. Shoot 'em on the spot, that's what I say. The BFG looked down from his lofty perch and said, this time to the head of the Air Force, You is having bally poppers, is you not? Is he being rude? The head of the Air Force said. He means helicopters, Sophie told him. Then why doesn't he say so? Of course we have helicopters. Whoopsie big bally poppers? Asked the BFG. Very big ones, the head of the Air Force said proudly. But no helicopter is big enough to get a giant like that inside it. You do not put him inside, the BFG said. You sling him underneath the belly of your belly popper and carry him like a torpedo. Like a what? Said the head of the Air Force. Like a torpedo, Sophie said. Could you do that, Air Marshal? The Queen asked. Okay, we're going to stop there because there are a couple of pictures, illustrations that have been drawn and by Quentin Blake, a very famous illustrator. He illustrated most of Roald Dahl's books. And we've got some illustrations, and I'm just wondering why the author has chosen to include illustrations in the story and why these illustrations are fictive. Let's have a look at the two illustrations on this page. Why do you think the author has chosen to include these illustrations in the story, and why are these illustrations effective? Why are they useful and helpful? Okay, I want you to have a little think about this. Then say your answer out loud, and then make a note of your answer on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. The author has chosen to include illustrations in the story. Why are these illustrations effective? Press pause now. Okay, great. You're back and you will have evaluated the pictures and the usefulness of the pictures. Well, let's see what I said. I said that I think the illustrations are effective because they help you to understand the story better. These illustrations show you what the characters look like, and you can see that they must look up to the giant because he's so large. Let's have a look at the pictures there. They are the two military men and Sophie. They are looking upwards at the giant, and we can see the giant, how big he is, looking down. And they help us to understand what these characters might look like. It's really useful when we're reading. Okay, we're going to keep reading to our next question to evaluate. Well, I suppose we could, the head of the Air Force admitted grudgingly. Then get cracking, the Queen said. You need 9 helicopters, 1 for each giant. Where is this place? The Air Force man said to the BFG. I presume you can pinpoint it on the map. Pinpoint? The BFG said the BFG. Map? Oh, he has never hearing these words before. Has the Air Force been talking slush bungle? The Air Marshal's face turned the colour of a ripe plum. He was not used to being told that he was talking slush bungle. The Queen, with her usual admirable tact and good sense, came to the rescue. BFG, she said, can you tell us more or less where Giant Country is? No, Magister, the BFG said, not on my alley. Then we're jiggered, cried the Army General. This is ridiculous, cried the Air Marshal. You must not be giving up so easy, the BFG said calmly. The first Titchy Popsicle you meet and you begin shouting, you is Biff Squiggled. Okay, we're going to stop there. The giant says, the first titchy bobstacle you meet and you begin shouting, you is Biff Squiggled. What is clever about the author's choice of made-up words here? So that I've underlined the made-up words, titchy bobstacle and Biff Squiggled. They're made-up words. The author has made up words. The author's done this right through the story when the giant's been speaking. We know the giant gets a bit muddled up with words. So why is it clever? Why is his choice of words clever? I want you to have a little think and then say your answer out loud and then write your answer down on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. The giant says the first titchy bobstacle you meet and you begin shouting you as Biff Squiggled, which is clever about the author's choice of made-up words here. Press pause now. Okay, great, you're back, and this is what I said. I said it is clever the way the author makes up words here because he's developing a voice for the giant. So he's creating a voice. We can hear the voice, the giant's voice as we're reading. And we know that he doesn't speak English very well. And his choice of made-up words is clever too, because even though they're nonsense words, they kind of sound like real words. Bobstacle sounds like obstacle, and Biff Squiggled, it kind of sounds like a biff, like you're bashing it. It sounds confusing, doesn't it? Okay, like you don't understand. So they kind of sound like real words. It's really clever the way he's chosen to make up those words. Okay, let's keep reading. The army general was no more used to being insulted than the air marshal. His face began to swell with fury and his cheeks blew out until they looked like two huge ripe tomatoes. "Your Majesty," he cried, "we are dealing with a lunatic. I want nothing more to do with this ridiculous operation." The Queen, who was used to the tantrums of her senior officials, ignored him completely. "BFG," she said, "would you please to tell these rather dim-witted characters exactly what to do?" "A pleasure, Your Majesty," the BFG said the BFG. "Now listen to me carefully, you two boot-bogglers." The military men began to twitch, but they stayed put. "I is not having the foggiest idea where giant country is in the world," the BFG said, "but I is always able to gallop there. I is galloping forthwards and backwards from giant country every night to blow my dreams into little chidlers' bedrooms. I is knowing the way very well. So all you have to do is this. Put your 9 big belly hoppers into the air and let them follow me as I is galloping along." Okay, I'm going to stop there. I've got another question I want us to evaluate or think about. When the giant talks, he keeps repeating, "I is." Okay, so you have a look in that part there. He says, "I is not having the foggiest idea. I is galloping. I is knowing. I is galloping along." So he says "I is" all of the time. So why is this repetition effective? It's a tricky one, isn't it? But I want you to have a little think, and then I want you to say your answer out loud, then write it down on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. When the giant talks, he keeps repeating, "I is." Why is this effective? Press pause now. Okay, you're back, and this is what I said. I said it is effective because we can hear the giant's voice when we are reading. The author repeats the grammatically incorrect. It's not correct to say "I is." And he says this throughout the book, and this makes the giant sound childlike and as though he is still learning how to speak English properly. So it's consistent throughout the book when the giant is talking. He says "I is," and that helps us to really get that voice in our head of the giant. We have the giant's voice in our head. Okay, we're going to keep reading. "How long will the journey take?" the Queen asked. "If we is leaving now," the BFG said, "we will be arriving just as the giants is having their afternoon snozzle." "Splendid," said the Queen. Then turning to the 2 military men, she said, "Prepare to leave immediately." The head of the army, who was feeling pretty miffed by the whole business, said, "That's all very well, Your Majesty, but what are we going to do with the blighters once we've got them back?" Don't you worry about that, the Queen told him. We'll be ready for them. Hurry up now, off you go. If it pleases your Majesty, Sophie said, I should like to ride with the BFG to keep him company. Where will you sit? Asked the Queen. In his ear, Sophie said. Show them, BFG. The BFG got down from his high chair. He picked Sophie up in his fingers. He swiveled his huge right ear until it was parallel with the ground. Then he placed Sophie gently inside it. The heads of the Army and the Air Force stood there goggling. The Queen smiled. You really are rather a wonderful giant, she said. Majesta, the BFG said, I is wishing to ask a very special thing from you. What is it? The Queen said. Could I please bring back Air and the Belly Poppers all my collections of dreams? They is taking me years and years to collect, and I is not wanting to lose them. Why, of course, the Queen said. I wish you a safe journey. Okay, so we're going to read another chapter today. I want you to sit back and listen, just so that we get through the whole book by the end of tomorrow. So sit back and listen and think of any questions or ideas that you have and maybe make a note of them on your piece of paper or on your home learning book. This chapter is called Capture. So I think we can project what's going to happen. This is when they're going to capture those 9 ghastly giants. Okay. The BFG had made thousands of journeys to and from giant country over the years, but he had never in his life made one quite like this. With 9 huge helicopters roaring along just over his head, he had never before travelled in broad daylight either. He hadn't dared to, but this was different. Now he was doing it for the Queen of England herself, and he was frightened of nobody. As he galloped across the British Isles with the helicopters thundering above him, people stood and gasped and wondered what on earth was going on. They had never seen the likes of it before, and they would wait, and they would never again. Every now and then, the pilots of the helicopters would catch a glimpse of a small girl wearing glasses, crouching in the giant's right ear and waving to them. They always waved back. The pilots marvelled at the giant's speed and at the way he leapt across wide rivers and over huge houses. But they hadn't seen anything yet. Be careful to hang on tight, the BFG said. We is going fast as a fizzlecrump. The BFG changed into his famous top gear, and all at once he began to fly forward as though there were springs in his legs and rockets in his toes. He went skimming over the earth like some magical hop, skip and jumper, with his feet hardly ever touching the ground. As usual, Sophie had to crouch low in the crevice of his ear to save herself from being swept clean away. The 9 pilots in the helicopter suddenly realized that they were being left behind. The giant was streaking ahead. They opened their throttles to full speed, and even then they were only just able to keep up. In the leading machine, the head of the Air Force was sitting behind the pilot. He had a world atlas on his knees and he kept staring first at the atlas, then at the ground below, trying to figure out where they were going. Frantically, he turned the pages of the atlas. Where the devil are we going? He cried. I haven't the foggiest idea, the pilot answered. The Queen's orders were to follow the giant, and that is exactly what I am doing. The pilot was a young Air Force officer with a bushy moustache. He was very proud of his moustache. He was also quite fearless and loved adventure. He thought this was a super adventure. It's fun going to new places, he said. New places? Shouted the head of the Air Force. What the blazes do you mean, new places? This place we're flying over now isn't in the atlas, is it? The pilot said, grinning. You're darn right it isn't in the atlas, cried the head of the Air Force. We're flowing clear off the last page. I expect the old giant knows where he's going, the young pilot said. He's leading us to disaster, cried the head of the Air Force. He was shaking with fear. In the seat behind him sat the head of the army, who was even more terrified. "You don't mean to tell me we've gone right off the Atlas?" he cried, leaning forward to look. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," cried the Air Force man. "Look yourself. Here's the very last map in the whole flaming Atlas. We went over that an hour ago." He turned the page, and as in all atlases, there were 2 completely blank pages at the very end. "So now we must be somewhere here," he said, putting a finger on one of the blank pages. "Where's here?" cried the head of the army. The young pilot was still grinning broadly. He said to them, "That's why they put the 2 blank pages on the back of the atlas. They're for new countries. You're meant to fill them in yourself." The head of the Air Force glanced down at the ground below. "Just look at this God-forsaken desert," he cried. "All the trees are dead and all the rocks are blue." "The giant has stopped," the young pilot said. "He's waving us down." The pilots throttled back the engines and all 9 helicopters landed safely on the great yellow wasteland. Then each of them lowered a ramp from its belly. 9 jeeps, 1 from each helicopter, were driven down the ramps. Each jeep contained 6 soldiers and a vast quantity of thick rope and heavy chains. "I don't see any giants," the head of the army said. The giants is all just out of sight over the giants is all just out of sight over there, the BFG told him. "But if you is taking these swashbuckling noise belly poppers any closer, all the giants is waking up at once, and then pop goes the weasel." "So you want us to proceed by jeep?" the head of the army said. "Yes," the BFG said, "but you must all be very, very hushy quiet. No roaring of motors, no shouting, no mucking about, no pickery-jokery." The BFG, with Sophie still in his ear, trotted forward and the jeeps followed close behind. Suddenly, the most dreadful rumbling noise was heard by everyone. The head of the army went pea-green in the face. "Those are guns," he cried. "There is a battle raging somewhere up ahead of us. Turn back, you lot. Let's get out of here." Pig Spiffle, the BFG said. "Those noises is not guns." "Of course they're guns," shouted the head of the army. "I'm a military man and I know a gun when I hear one. Turn back." "Those is just the giants snortling in their sleep," the giant said. "I is a giant myself and I know a giant snortle when I was hearing one." "Are you sure? Quite sure?" the army man said anxiously. "Positive," the BFG said. "Proceed cautiously," the army man ordered. They all moved on. Then they saw them. Even at the distance, they were enough to scare the daylights out of the soldiers. But when they got close and saw what the giants really looked like, they began to sweat with fear. 9 fearsome, half-naked, 50-feet-long brutes lay sprawled over the ground in various grotesque attitudes of sleep, and the sound of their snoring was indeed like gunfire in a battle. The BFG raised a hand. The jeeps all stopped. The soldiers got out. "What happens if one of them wakes up?" whispered the head of the army, his knees knocking together from fear. "If any of them is waking up, he will gobble you down before you can say knack jife," the BFG answered, grinning hugely. "Me is the only one what won't be gobbled up, because giants is never eating me. Me and Sophie is only the safe ones, because I is hiding her as if that happens." The head of the army took several paces to the rear. So did the head of the Air Force. They climbed rather quickly onto the back into their jeep, ready to make a fast getaway if necessary. "Go forward, men," the head of the army said. "Go forward and do your duty bravely." The soldiers crept forward with their ropes and chains. All of them were trembling mightily. None dared speak a word. The BFG, with Sophie now sitting on the palm of his hand, stood nearby watching the operation. To give the soldiers their due, they were extremely courageous. There were 6 well-trained, efficient men working on each giant, and within 10 minutes, 8 of the 9 giants had been trussed up like chickens and were still snoring contentedly. The 9th, who happened to be the flesh lump eater, was causing trouble for the soldiers because he was lying with his arm tucked underneath his enormous body. It was impossible to tie his wrists and arms together without first getting that arm out from underneath him. Very, very cautiously, the 6 soldiers who were working on the flesh lump eater began to pull at the huge arm, trying to release it. The flesh lump eater opened his tiny piggy black eyes. "Which of you fell pesters is wiggling my arm?" he bellowed. "Is that you, Rotsam? man hugger. Suddenly he saw the soldiers. In a flash, he was sitting up. He looked around him. He saw more soldiers. With a roar, he leapt to his feet. The soldiers, petrified with fear, froze where they were. They had no weapons with them. The head of the army put his jeep into reverse. "Human beans!" the flesh lump eater yelled. "What's all you flashbanking Roxham half-baked beans doing in our country?" He made a grab at a soldier and swept him up in his hands. "I is having early suppers today," he shouted, holding the poor squirming soldier at arm's length and roaring with laughter. Sophie, standing on the palm of the BFG's hand, was watching, horror-struck. "Do something," she cried, "quick before he eats him." "Put that human being down," the BFG shouted. The flesh lump eater turned and stared at the BFG. "What is you doing here with these grotty twiglets?" he bellowed. "You is making me very suspiciously spishy." The BFG made a rush at the flesh lump eater, but the colossal 54-foot-high giant simply knocked him over with a flick of his free arm. At the same time, Sophie fell off the BFG's palm onto the ground. Her mind was racing. She must do something. She must. She remembered the sapphire brooch the Queen had pinned onto her chest. Quickly she undid it. "I is guzzling you nice and slow," the flesh lump eater was saying to the soldier in his hand. "Then I is guzzling 10 or 20 more of you midgy little maggots down there. You is not getting away from me because I is galloping 50 times faster than you." Sophie ran up behind the flesh lump eater. She was holding the brooch between her fingers. When she was right up close to the great naked hairy legs, she rammed the 3-inch-long pin of the brooch as hard as she could into the flesh lump eater's right ankle. It went deep into the flesh and stayed there. The giant gave a roar of pain and jumped high in the air. He dropped the soldier and made a grab for his ankle. The BFG, knowing what a coward the flesh lump eater was, saw his chance. "You was bitten by a snake," he shouted. "I seed it biting you. It was a frightsome, poisonous viper. It was a deadly, dangerous, veined screen viper." "Save our souls," bellowed the flesh lump eater. "Sound the crumpets. I is bitten by a specious venomous scream viper." He flopped to the ground and sat there, howling his head off and clutching his ankles with both hands. His fingers felt the brooch. "The teeth of the dreaded viper is still sticking into me," he yelled. "I is feeling the teeth sticking into my anklet." The BFG saw his chance. We must be getting those viper's teeth out at once," he cried. "Otherwise you is deader than a duck soup. I is helping you." The BFG knelt down beside the flesh lump eater. "You must grab your anklet very tight with both hands," he ordered. "That will stop the poisonous juices from Vincent Viper going up your leg and into your heart." The flesh lump eater grabbed his ankles with both hands. "Now close your eyes and grittle your teeth and look up to heaven and say your prayers while I is taking the teeth of the venison viper," the BFG said. The terrified flesh lump eater did exactly as he was told. The BFG signalled for some rope. A soldier rushed it over to him. With both the flesh lump eater's hands gripping his ankle, it was a simple matter for the BFG to tie the ankles and hands together with a tight knot. "I is pulling the frightsome viper's teeth," the BFG said as he pulled the knot tight. "Do it quickly," shouted the flesh lump eater, "before I is poisoned to death." "Here he is," said the BFG, standing up. "You can look now." When the flesh lump eater saw he was trussed up like a turkey, he gave a yell so loud that the heavens trembled. He rolled and he wriggled, he fought and he figgled, he squirmed and he squiggled, but there was not a thing he could do. "Well done you," Sophie cried. "Well done you," said the BFG, smiling down at the little girl. "You are saving all our lives." "Will you please get that brooch back for me?" Sophie said. "It belongs to the Queen." The BFG pulled the beautiful brooch out of the flesh lump eater's ankle. The flesh lump eater howled. The BFG wiped the pin and handed it back to Sophie. Curiously, not one of the other 8 snoring giants had woken up during this schmozzle. When you was only sleeping 1 or 2 hours a day, you was sleeping extra doubly deep, the BFG explained. The head of the army and the Air Force drove forward once again in their jeep. Her Majesty will be very pleased with me, the head of the army said. I shall probably get a medal. What is the next move? Now you is driving over to my cave to load up my bottles of my dreams, the BFG said. We can't waste time with that rubbish, the army general said. It is the Queen's order, Sophie said. She was now back in the BFG's hand. So the 9 jeeps drove across to the BFG's cave, and the great dream loading operation began. There were 50,000 jars, and all to be loaded up, more than 5,000 to each jeep, and it took over an hour to finish the job. While the soldiers were loading the dreams, the BFG and Sophie disappeared over the mountains on a mysterious errand. When they came back, the BFG had a sack the size of a small house slung over his shoulders. And what that you got in there? The head of the army demanded to know. Curiosity is killing the rat, the BFG said, and he turned away from the silly man. When he was sure that all his precious dreams had been safely loaded onto the jeeps, the BFG said, Now we're driving back to Valley Poppers and picking up the frightsome giants. The jeeps drove back to the helicopters. The 50,000 dreams were carried carefully, jar by jar, onto the helicopters. The soldiers climbed back on board, but the BFG and Sophie stayed on the ground. Then they all returned to where the 9 giants were lying. It was a fine sight to see them, these great air machines hovering over the trussed-up giants. It was an even finer sight to see the giants being woken up by the terrific thundering of the engines overhead, and the finest sight of all was to observe those 9 hideous brutes squirming and twisting on the ground like a mass of mighty snakes as they tried to free themselves from their ropes and chains. I is flush-bunkled, roared the flesh-lump-eater. I is split-swiggled, yelled the child chewer. I is swog-swallowed, bellowed the bone-cruncher. I is goose-grungled, howled the man-eater. I is gunzel-swiped, shouted the meat-dripper. I is flat-gungled, screamed the maid-masher. I is slop-groggled, squawked the gizzard-golfer. I is crod-squinkled, yelled the blood-bottler. I is bop-muggled, screeched the butcher-boy. The 9 giant-carrying helicopters each chose a separate giant and hovered directly over him. Very strong steel hawsers with hooks on the end of them were lowered from the front and rear of each helicopter. The BFG quickly secured the hooks to the giants' chains, one hook near the leg, one hook near the arms. Then very slowly the giants were winched up into the air parallel with the ground. The giants roared and bellowed, but there was nothing they could do. The BFG, with Sophie once more resting comfortably in his ear, set off at a gallop for England. The helicopters all banked around and followed after him. It was an amazing spectacle, those 9 helicopters winging through the sky, each with a trussed-up 50-foot-long giant slung underneath. The giants themselves must have found it an interesting experience. They never stopped bellowing, but their howls were drowned by the noise of the engines. When it began to get dark, the helicopters switched on powerful searchlights and trained onto the galloping giants so as to keep him in sight. They flew right through the night and arrived in England just as dawn was breaking. And we are going to stop there for today. Tomorrow we're going to finish the BFG and we're going to carry on evaluating. On your home learning book or on your piece of paper, you could draw your favourite part of the story, then write a short sentence or paragraph explaining why it's your favourite part. Well done for joining in today's lesson. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.